Welcome to the Bearded Bereans, where we analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures. Well, welcome to this special episode of Season 1 of the Bearded Bereans. I'm Jason. I'm here with Cole and special guest Kelly. It's good to see both of you. Cole, you want to do some introductions for us?
Sure, yeah. Kelly Crawford and her husband Aaron go to my church. And I discovered pretty quickly that she's a blogger and has been blogging since 2007 and has recently started a podcast with the same name, Generation Cedar. And I'm excited to have you on because we have been discussing all sorts of things about education, and that seems to be something that you blog about on the regular. Um, I know that you have 11 kids. Is that right, Kelly?
That's right. Yeah.
Is 7 still at home?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you got your quiver full. That's for
River
sure.
is full.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Well, so just kind of curious how you got started blogging.
Well, I started blogging when I didn't know what a blog was, but essentially I had a lot that I wanted to say. I had quit my job as a high school English teacher through a series of lots of the Lord just bringing people and things into our lives that brought us to the place where we wanted to homeschool. So I had quit my job, had come home, really had a passion for homeschooling and just encouraging stay-at-home moms. And so anyway, my brother encouraged me to start a blog, and I did, and it took off pretty quickly, and probably because I'm so controversial about a lot of subjects, but that seems to help build an audience. But yeah, I've been blogging since then. That has invited occasionally. Now I do some speaking nationwide on homeschooling and things like that. But it's my passion to encourage women, especially because I don't think our culture is really doing that. And I feel like there is no more place more powerful to wield, to change the culture than within the home. And so, given that belief, I want to encourage moms and as much as I can to be faithful and not listen to what the culture is telling us about stay-at-home moms, and just explaining the power of that.
Yeah, it's amazing the derision that people hold for stay-at-home moms. It seems like on the regular, whenever you're
Yeah.
talking to someone, it's like, well, what do you do? And well, I stay home with my kids.
Yeah.
Like,
And I mean, I can attest to the fact that when I did work full-time as a teacher and I had 2 small children at the time, I was working 2 full-time jobs. No one expects a man to do that, but that's what I was doing, and I wasn't doing anything well. And so, deciding to come home again, I just wanted to be that voice that could come alongside other women that have made that choice and say, what you're doing is possibly the most important work that you will ever do.
yeah, for sure. So tell us about Generation Cedar. Why the name? What are you doing with that?
So, we hear the Generation X, Generation Y, every generation has a name. And so I was just thinking through, like, what's the goal? What do I want the goal to be? And Psalm 92:12 says, "The righteous shall flourish like the cedars in Lebanon." And so I thought I'll do Generation Cedar because the goal is to raise righteous men and women to flourish like cedars. And it's not a very catchy title, I realize that, but that's where it came from. I wanted it to be meaningful.
It's catchy for me because I like trees.
Oh yeah, okay.
My dog is named Cedar, right? I got Cedar, Cypress.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, and I love the idea and we had talked about C.S. Lewis. If you've watched some of our episodes, one of the quotes that he has is that it's the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. And so it's an impactful quote.
Yeah, I love him.
One of the things that we've been working on in the Bearded Bereans is the problem of society, the problem that it's crumbled to the ground, and our solution that we've worked towards is Christian education. And so One of the reasons we wanted to pull you in is because we've talked about private school, we've talked about classical Christian education, we've talked about Montessori, we've talked about all these different types of school um, philosophies, and we kind of left homeschooling alone. And so I'd really like to
Shame on
have
you.
Hey,
an
no, wait a minute. That's
expert.
not true. We talked about homeschooling, and when we talked about those other approaches, we didn't say this is specific to a brick and mortar school. It could have been an online school, a homeschool. It could have been a bunch of things.
This is true. This is true.
That's
But
okay.
But
I feel
largely,
but
better.
we yeah, but we didn't necessarily dive into homeschooling specifically.
yes, that was my point.
Yeah,
You're right. You're right.
yeah.
So,
Gotcha.
but we did have that thought that it would be nice to have someone on like you to really just give us practical, what does homeschool look like? So glad that you were able to come on. So we talked about catechism as a way to get education kicked off rightly. What are some things that you guys do at home to really start that educational process from the early years?
Well, one thing that I had to learn, it took me a lot of years to learn. A lot of parents are scared to even homeschool. Or they want to homeschool, but they're scared too because that same question, how do I do it? How do I start? You've already started. They've already started. A child is born with the most innate curiosity.
Mm.
From the time he's born until he's 5, he's learned a whole new language. He's learned a ton about psychology. He's learned about physics. He's even learned the syntax of language, and all this stuff is happening without any real effort from parents. And so part of that is, do we really have to, what do we do to prepare them? They're already prepared to learn. They come here ready to learn by what God has instilled in them. And so, I mean, from an early stage, one of my things is that you set the foundation that, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so starting from a very young age we understand that the foundation of education is Christ. And as far as catechism, scripture memorization is a big deal for me. And that's part of the catechizing I think that you're talking about. But just the idea for most parents is that they can relax about the how do I. It's less of I and more of God has already given them what they need to learn everything they need to learn. And so that's kind of my starting point when I talk to parents about homeschooling.
That's
Yeah.
such a great point, I think. Because when parents think to themselves, "Oh, how can I do this?" What they're really thinking is, "Oh, how can I reproduce what the government is doing?" Which
Yep.
is a silly question. Like you can't do that, and you shouldn't want to do that.
Right.
And like you said, the reality is they're already doing it. And to start with the reality that education happens in the home inherently, like that's the beginning place of it. And we might subsidize it with some other things, but
Right.
parents have been homeschooling their kids for thousands of years. I mean, that's sort of the way that it's always worked. It's not a new
Right.
thing. And to have that starting point of education happens here, it's not something that starts when they turn 5 and they go off to some other building with strangers. Like
Yep.
that's not the place where education happens. It's in the home. That's great.
Yeah, and I see parents kind of panic, and it's funny to me because, like I said, from 0 to 5, they haven't worried about any kind of formal curriculum. This child has to learn a whole language,
Yeah.
and he does it without any problem. And then they turn 5, and we panic, like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, now they don't know. Now they're not going to be able to learn anything. But they still possess the same thing that was already there, that God has put in them. And I think the biggest step in for people homeschooling, they need to deschool first.
Ooh.
Kind of what you were saying, Jay. They need to deschool and deprogram from the narrative that we all are just so accustomed to thinking about.
Yeah,
So
so flesh out what you mean by D-school. Are you talking about the education that they received as children and kind of detoxing from that, for lack of a better word?
yeah, I mean, it's just most of us grew up in public school, and so we in our minds have one way to do school. And in my opinion, that's not even the superior way. The classroom model is not, in my opinion, not a superior method of education. And so, yeah, I mean, I know when I first started homeschooling, I just tried to replicate the classroom. I had a bulletin board in my house.
Hmm.
It was ridiculous. And so I had to deschool a lot over the years, and part of that is understanding that the classroom kind of teaches to one kind of student when kids are just vastly different. And so you've got some kids that are going to thrive academically, some kids are going to thrive mechanically, some kids are going to thrive creatively. And so all of those different areas are a form of intelligence.
Hmm.
And we've made the habit of measuring intelligence by one small little measure. We measure it academically. If a child is academic, he's smart. Otherwise, he's not. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the big box education right now that hurts kids. I think it hurts kids.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Um, Jay,
Because I had
which
some kids that didn't fit into the academic box, but they were brilliant kids in other areas. And so we have to get out of this idea that just because they're not math geniuses or whatever, that they're not smart in their own way. So that might be a side tangent, but it's just one of my passions.
No, yeah, I think that's good. So that's kind of one of the things that I've noticed about you is you're very relaxed as far as your um, method. It's we really want to direct energies and um, not put them in handcuffs of or certainly not chemical handcuffs, but um, put
Boxes. I
put
call
in
it the box.
boxes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's so foreign to me because I grew up in public ed. I've never even thought about how that would look. Whenever I picture homeschool, I picture exactly what you talk about: bulletin boards and textbooks open and kids in the. But help me understand, as the kids grow and we're getting into things like math and history and things like that. How do you do that? How does that work at home?
Oh, that's a broad question. So
Yeah.
I will be honest. I kind of gauge my kids. So I have some kids and I can see that they're kind of bent in this direction and I let them go as far as they want to go or can go in that direction. But I have other kids that, I mean, they literally have like a barrier, let's say, to higher math. I don't require that they do higher math if that becomes such an obstacle, because I feel like the kids who are bent in that direction are going to they're going to kids that are going to follow STEM careers or whatever, they're going to be bent in that direction. But you can kind of see early on when a kid is not going to be bent that way.
Right.
Another example of our relaxed method, and I've had time to prove whether this works, but have you heard of copy work?
Yes.
Okay. So even as a high school English teacher who loves to diagram sentences, we don't do formal grammar in our homeschool.
Hmm.
Crazy. We do copy work. Copy work has been around for centuries. Some of the Renaissance Latin guys did it to learn Latin. It's a kind of a proven method, but it's been forgotten about. So we've done copy work primarily to learn grammar, syntax, penmanship, all that stuff. So I mean, I admit there's part of me that's like, I don't know if this is going to be enough if the rubber meets the road, because that's one of the things that parents fear. What if my child goes on to college? Is he going to be prepared? Have I jumped through all the hoops? So I had a daughter go to college a couple of years ago. She ended up with an associate's degree. She changed her mind about the direction she wanted to go, but she wrote her first essay in college. She had never written one at home. And she made all A's, by the way, in college, top of her class in every class. Her professor asked her if he could use her essay to show to the class as an example of a good essay. So I
Wow.
was like, oh, thank you, Lord.
Vindication. Yeah.
Yeah. So just there's so much of this that I have felt like we can trust the process. Kids learn what they need to learn when they need to learn it. And she proved that in a lot of other, areas too. And so I think there's just a lot of education that comes more naturally than we really understand, because we were brought up in the system and thinking we had to be spoon-fed information, and we possess a lot more ability to learn what we need to learn.
Man, that's great. One of the things Jay has said a couple times, and you could add to this, Jay, if you'd like, but um, the the goal is all these subjects that we use are just tools to shape the human, to shape the child, right? That the primary goal is um, the goodness, the child being conformed into the image of Christ, basically. And so, as you say that, I'm hearing that is your method. That is, your goal is to produce good humans, is something I said recently. Not just brainiacs or well-rounded individuals is what you're looking for, that love God, serve God, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I refer to terms like, living education, whole schooling. I've used that term before, but education, the academics part is a small part, whereas education itself is forming a whole person, like you just said. And so, yeah, that's the goal that I think we should have. And honestly, looking down the road, what really lends to a person's success more than anything else? Is it how well he did in physics or how well they did it? It's really not those things. It's really their character.
Hmm.
That has a huge, that has a lot to do with how they fare. Their ability to relate to people, their emotional intelligence, that has a huge bearing on what kind of, person they become or what kind of success, if you will, they have. So there's it's so much bigger picture than just the academic side.
No, I think it's great. We, at my school, we're a brick and mortar school. I wouldn't say that we're a big box school, like you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. We're a small box school, whatever that is. Um, but that's essentially the perspective that we have. Is we use these academic things as tools, and like Cole was saying, in order to educate the kid and enculturate him into God's kingdom, in a really holistic, comprehensive sort of way. But we do also, at the same time, recognize that we are an academic institution, and those are the tools that we are using, are
Yeah.
academic ones. Um, but we also recognize those aren't the only tools that you should be using. There should be lots of things going on in the home and in the church and in every aspect of the kid's life. So even as a brick and mortar school, we're just one little piece of the
Right.
whole educational process.
Yeah, that's helpful. As soon as Miss Crawford said that, I thought, this is going to be an interesting interview, because how do you square those two things? But I really see it being squared in this, that the goals are the same. It's just different tools. Everybody has different
Mhm.
toolboxes that they're employing. And as long as we end up with kids that are, as I said, being conformed into the image of Christ and loving Him, and I love the way Jay puts it, enculturated into the kingdom. That's what's important. So,
Yeah, and Kelly's absolutely right about kids, some of them being inclined towards academics and other ones not. And we have this at our school. There's a few kids I can think of who are brilliant, super smart. They don't do all that well in class. And it's probably because it's not maybe the best place for them. And, we work with their parents to try and find a solution for them that does work. But, the classroom is not the best place for everyone. That's for sure.
Yeah, I have a real strong passion about that. I guess because I do have several kids that just show a lot of genius in other areas besides academic. My one of my sons is just a brilliant artist, but
mm,
literally whatever part of his brain that makes him such a brilliant artist makes him terrible at math. And, you know, and he struggled with that because he understands what the status quo is, that you're supposed to measure up in all these different areas. But I've just tried to remind him and encourage him that he has a genius that other people don't have. And it's that's a passion of mine, to help people understand or start to recognize just so many different categories of intelligence. I think
mm.
we don't do that well.
Yeah, I know from the public standpoint, that there's kids left behind all the time due to that. And obviously, I'm playing off of George Bush's No Child Left Behind Act, where
Right.
it basically took teachers and forced them to teach to tests. Um,
Well, I mean, when I was a teacher, I have written a very popular one of my popular blog posts that I have is called My Public Apology what's the name of it? A letter of public apology to my former student, something like that. And I had a guy in mind that I taught school to, and I remember taking him out in the hallway and just really, I mean, I gave him a tongue lashing, and it was something to the effect of, if you don't pay attention in class, and if you don't do well, if you don't straighten up, you're not going to amount to anything. I mean, we were reading Shakespeare, and his eyes were glossing over. This guy grew up to be, he was an incredible mechanic, brilliant at what he did. He's a very successful guy now. He
Hmm.
didn't want to read Shakespeare, and we were just forced, like, you got to read Shakespeare to be successful. Like, I mean, Shakespeare's good, but not everybody's going to thrive on that. And so, but to make people feel bad about, not doing as well as the more studious students, I think it does something to a person's psyche that they have to get over as an adult.
How did you get to a point where you're like, yes, you're ready for college? How do you know that that's something that, and it sounds like you really didn't at the time that you sent your other your,
I don't think I did. I mean,
yeah.
for the daughter that went to college, she was always bent more toward a studious, she was always very diligent in her schoolwork, and she would always go above and beyond what I asked her to do. And so it was a very natural transition for her, even if there were gaps, which they didn't show up if she's making all A's. She was able to compensate just by, like I said, figuring it out. Think about, as we're adults, how many things have you learned, have I learned, just because we needed to learn them? I mean, that's just a natural thing that we take for granted, I think. So it's not, parents can lay aside some of the stress as far as, I've got to prepare every little detail in case they go to college. They'll figure it out. They really will, if there are any gaps. When you teach to the test, you're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on a lot. So
Yeah, you just made that click for me because I've been trying to reconcile the two thoughts, but it's really your I don't want to call it the spaghetti method. It's not like you're throwing everything and seeing what sticks. But I guess in some way you are. You're like, here's your curriculum. This is what we're going to do. But you're excellent at drawing. You're excellent at, sculpting or whatever art, brained people are good at. I'm not art brained. So it art brained. Did I just make something up?
I like
No,
it.
it's
It
real. It's a
works.
real thing.
It's a
Art
real thing.
brained.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It's certainly not me, but it's like we're going to, encourage and help move along that way. And really, because you're developing a good human, because you're developing someone who thinks through things and works through different things, that they'll be ready just by virtue of they're a human. They can do this.
Right.
Nobody's keeping them from this. It's not like you have to, and it's like this in state agencies and real estate exams, and I mean all these different things that we have in our culture that we're so preparatory minded. You've got to do X in order to do Y, and that may not be the case. You may be just really good at Y without doing X, and so
Right.
that's an
Taking out the
interesting thought.
unnecessary steps. I also, problem solving skills cannot be underrated, because
Yeah.
if you know how to find an answer, solve a problem, there's not much that you're going to be limited on, So
Hmm.
big emphasis on that.
So did you guys do an introductory course in logic or anything like that?
Nope. We have a lot of conversations. I believe in the power of conversation,
Hmm.
thinking through things, asking questions.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's the best way to develop, thinking skills, critical thinking skills. Why do you think that? What makes you say that? Why do you believe that? Making them develop those answers.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Huh. So it's really learning by inquiry at that point. That's good. I
Hmm.
like that. It's almost, was that how Socrates did it?
Maybe.
Jay, correct me
I
if I'm
had a
wrong.
I had a friend who he had 6 kids that are just brilliant. They're prodigies. I mean, they're just
Yeah.
brilliant. And I heard him speak at a conference, and he said most of our homeschooling was primarily conversation.
Huh.
And so that was like a wow moment for me.
Yeah,
But we do a lot of reading. My kids honestly don't like to read. I just make them read. But, I think that's another good tool for developing the critical thinking processes. So
absolutely.
everybody, yeah, agrees with that probably.
Well, yeah, 100%. So I get to have some of your kids in
Oh no.
literature on Friday. No, it's great. I enjoy every minute of it. But I do make them read out loud, and
Yeah.
um, they seem to love it. I don't know. I might have a misread on them on that part, but and probably it's the material we read, because we read this book that was really silly and funny, and it's really engaging for that age. But I really think your method of conversation and what you're doing with reading is paying off. I mean, they all understand what they're reading, and they're, excited about what's happening in the story. And that's really neat for me because, again, so I don't know if you know this about me, but I worked in public education for about 6 years as a para. And so my job was helping kids figure things out. That was pretty much what I did.
Okay.
And um, it was like pulling teeth. They didn't want to learn. They didn't want to be there. And that's something that's different about teaching at the church is every one of those kids want to learn. It's incredible, the difference.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, Cole, I'm assuming that you're in a classroom setting ish, at least at church, while you're teaching this literature class. And Kelly, so you've supplemented some of the things that you've done at home with some other things. How do you make those determinations as to when you're going to do that? Are you going to send all your kids to that thing, or is it just for the ones who work? What does that process look like for you?
The co-op at church has been amazing, and I love that balance. I feel like it's a good balance to our more relaxed approach at home. And so, yeah, I love that they've got that structure. I send all of them that are within that age group or within the age limits to go. And yeah, they seem to love it and thrive. And it's a really good supplement to have for sure. We're really enjoying them.
Good.
Yeah,
Hmm.
what other kind of supplementals do you tend to gravitate towards? I mean, co-op obviously, but
My favorite supplements are documentaries.
yeah,
Or just, I mean, there's so many great resources out there, and I do have a few visual learners that will just eat up, if they're watching science, they
yeah,
remember and retain everything. And so I'm so thankful for the age that we're in, and they don't spend a lot of time on the internet, but it is there. And, the other day we were reading about what were we reading about? Italy, maybe. We were studying something, and I found some great documentaries to supplement, with great cinematic visuals, and it really brought to life what we were reading. So I think that's a great tool that, parents have access to.
yeah. I watch documentaries all the time. It's one of my
Yeah,
favorite things to do.
yeah,
The way that they
yep,
package information and make it engaging, and
right,
it makes learning like you're not learning. I don't know
right,
how else to put that. So
yep,
Although it's really sad that we all know what you mean when you say it makes learning not like learning, because we all have this idea of learning being like this grueling, sort of painful thing almost. It really ought
right.
not be that way,
No,
yeah,
no, because it's not whenever you first start. I don't
right?
know any kids that whenever they first go to school aren't excited to go to school.
yeah,
It's usually around week 2 that they're like, oh, I gotta go to school. That's just been
yeah,
my experience. But all the nieces and nephews I've had, they love learning.
yeah,
And you got to know whenever you're in a situation where a kid doesn't want to learn anymore that you've done something terribly wrong.
right. Because that natural curiosity is within them.
Squelched.
Yep.
So what kind of pitfalls do you see homeschoolers falling into? Parents, what are some things that they need to avoid?
So one of those things is comparison.
Mhm.
And I would say comparison between yourself and how other families are doing it, but also comparison among your children, because like I said earlier, they're so different. I mean, you can't just apply the same thing to every child. And that's to me one of the advantages of homeschooling, is being able to tailor that a little bit to each kid's bent. Um, but it's easy to look at other families. I'm not doing enough. I'm doing, you know, I should be doing what they're doing. And it's just, that's homeschooling has as many varieties as there are families, I guess, in terms of freedom of how to approach it. The other pitfall, I would say, and I don't know if it's as common now, but when I first started homeschooling, it was a very common thing that parents, I think, we didn't say it out loud, but we thought and believed if we homeschool our kids and we do ABC, we're going to get this exact result. And a lot of parents have been disillusioned to find they didn't maybe get the result they wanted. And so putting your trust in a system or a method, huge mistake. Okay. And it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that we throw everything out the window because, this didn't work on this child. Because our job is to be faithful no matter what. We have to be faithful as much as we know how to be. Imperfect as we are, we just remain faithful. But if I could go back and tell my younger self, don't be disillusioned if one of your kids doesn't turn out just like you thought they would, or something, and not to blame yourself for that, because at the end of the day, God is sovereign and we do our best to be faithful, but we leave the results to Him.
Man, that's so good. And I think we there's two things you said that kind of sprung some thoughts to my head. But one of them is so Colorado in its constitution, Jay, how's it worded that education they have the right to be educated? Is that
The
what it
right to
is?
be educated. Yeah.
As if education is something that happens to them. And well, it's completely opposed to what you just said, right? It's like um, education is just this formulaic thing that you can impose upon a child, and that child, voila, is educated. And that's not how children work, because they're not
No,
computers. It's not input ABC get DEF. That's
right?
not how it works. And I think we know that intuitively, but I think we're so, like you say, we need to de-school, de-educate ourselves, um, decondition ourselves is what we've been using. That you really need to get out of that and realize that you're working with an eternal soul. Toby Sumpter talks about this a lot, that we are molding eternal souls, and they are so much more than computers. They're so much more than, and we are not perfect. We can be faithful. We can do everything we can, but at the end result, that child is self-aware. They have a brokenness due to sin, and we can't mold them exactly how they're going to be. I mean, it's just that sometimes the potter's wheel goes too fast and spins some clay off. That just happens, right? So the other thing that you said that I think we should consider is the comparison. And again, this is a public education nightmare. It's all about comparison. It's comparison, comparison, comparison. Grade scale, like your or A, you make it A, but nobody else made an A, and it's all about what other kids are doing, and it's not about what this one kid is doing. And it kind of goes with some of the questions that I have decided not to go down. But you know, I think a lot of people think, well, how do I know if my kid's on level? Well, what is that level anyway? That's completely arbitrary. Who
What does
determined?
behind mean?
Yeah, what does behind mean? What is fifth grade level? Who determines that? Well, the government does. And why are they determining that exactly? So just if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I say that all the time. Like, we don't use that term, we're behind, or um, one child reads at 5, one child reads at 9,
Hmm.
and they do it on their own timetable. But the whole comparison of being behind or being, I don't like that. I don't think it applies to kids. They're vastly different, and it's another damaging element of the system. To think about, I mean, if you're a kid and you are that one that's deemed behind, that has some damaging consequences to it that kids probably take with them into adulthood. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I can tell
so
you it does.
yeah,
Um, been there, done that. Uh, so I got a funny story.
you're not behind, Cole.
Yeah, I'm far behind. So a buddy of mine went to school with, and uh, we had this program called Gifted and Talented, and it was a big deal. You got tested for it. If you tested so high, you got to be in the program. Well, I didn't make it, right? And I didn't talk to my buddy at all. He made it. He was gifted and talented. I wasn't, right? And so we get into adulthood. I don't talk to him for about 10 years. And it still rises to my mind every time we talk, and I make this little joke, and when we're talking about something, be like, "Well, you're probably right. I wasn't gifted and talented," or something like that. So, and
Still with you.
that's a funny thing, and it really doesn't hurt me, but I'm sure that it could. I'm
Yeah,
sure that it did at one point, right?
yeah.
So there's definitely, we got to be careful how we um, encourage kids, and I think that's an important thing to think through.
Hmm. I
So
do too.
obviously, and we're kind of moving over to Jay for a second. Your school has grade levels, right?
Yes.
And so, how do you guys do y'all use that terminology like with the kid that this kid is behind, and how do you guys work with that?
So we use the terminology of value added. So a kid comes in at, say he's in second grade, right? And he we test him and they give us a benchmark, and they use the second grade benchmark. This is where he should be, in comparison to his peers. And so maybe they'll say he's reading, or the test will tell us he's reading at a first grade, 1.5 grade level, so
Mm.
halfway through first grade. Well, we would want to add a year of growth to that kid when he's with us for a year. So if he started at 1.5 and he's in second
I
grade,
see.
we're hoping that by the end of second grade, he's at 2.5.
Yeah.
Um, and it's still an arbitrary number and goal. We want him to add a year. Well, who says that that's how much has to be added in a year, right?
Well, if it's not the
Um,
government dictating it to you, I'm okay with it. But go
no,
ahead.
it's not. It's us making that determination that we want them
Yeah.
to advance at this rate, and that rate is based on this is about the rate that most kids advance at, and so. But we don't use the language of this kid is behind, or this kid is ahead. We just talk about value added. We want to add a year of value to their educational experience if they're with us for a year.
Yeah, that's helpful. So Kelly, what kind of resources would you point people to that are really determining that they want to homeschool?
Well, there are so many resources. In terms of curriculum, it's an ocean and it can be overwhelming. And, I don't know. The first resource, honestly, my favorite author, he was a public school teacher for 30 years and then he quit. You know who I'm going to say, don't you?
I do.
John Taylor Gatto.
Yep.
He was the most instrumental in my deschooling. I'll say that. And so understanding his perspective helped me to form, more of my homeschooling methods, I guess. And it helped me to be more relaxed and trust the process. So, you know, just getting your mind around not trying to recreate the classroom at home. I think that's where parents need to start, because if you just start with, if you just dive into what curriculum do I need, what do I, then you're getting all caught up in that again. Um, so I would start there. I would start at just researching some of that and just relaxing, letting your kids reacclimate to not being in a classroom for a while. There's no big rush to just dive in. Um, and then as far as curriculum goes, there are so many choices out there that I don't even know where to start. I wrote a book called Think Outside the Classroom that kind of helps with that deep programming. This is the way we approach homeschooling, which I call a relaxed approach to homeschooling. It's very small, easy to read. I've got a lot of good feedback about having clarity about moving forward. So, yeah, that's where I would start. And then the curriculum part, just figure out what style you prefer, what style your kids are going to thrive in. I always say the curriculum is just a tool.
Yep.
At the point that you become a slave to the curriculum, then you're doing it wrong. So don't let it be a slave. Don't let yourself become enslaved to it. Just use it as a tool.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so good.
we talk about the same thing at our school, where the curriculum is just a tool, and really the teacher is the curriculum. And so in a homeschool, the parents, the dad and the mom, they are the curriculum. And in many ways, what we're doing at our school is we're selling time with our teachers. That's at the end of the day, that's the product that our students are getting. And in the home, it's that time and those conversations like you were talking about that has so much value. And so,
Right.
I love the approach of the relaxed approach, and you're just recognizing where the real genuine value lies, and that's in the people themselves.
Yeah.
That's good. So where could people find you, Kelly?
So my blog is generationscedar.com. And right now I'm having major technical difficulties, but hopefully by the time this airs, that will be straightened out. And then from there, you can find the podcast that I just started recently, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram too. So yeah, any of those places.
The podcast is excellent, by the way. I think it's
Thank you.
perfect delivery mode for you.
Thank
So,
you.
yes, absolutely. Well,
there's another random tidbit. So
sure.
random, but I don't know why I feel compelled to say it. But
It's the spirit. The spirit is
I
moving.
know.
All right.
I feel like, and this is a very difficult challenge in the age that we're in, one of the most important things we can do for our kids in terms of just the whole education model, they need to be bored. Boredom is a fantastic catalyst for exploration, creativity, growth, productivity. And that's something that's really missing because, with devices now, it's hard to get our kids, like, you literally have to take everything away from them to create this atmosphere of boredom that drives them to learn, explore, create, produce. And I just think that's kind of important. That's a little bonus tip.
That is a bonus tip. I'm going to follow that up a little bit. I'm kind of curious. So, your child says, "Mom, I'm bored." What do you do?
Well, if he says I'm bored, I give him a chore. So he learns not to say that very quickly.
Okay. All right.
So, I mean, but the reality is if he's bored long enough, he's going to figure out how not to be bored, and that can lead to all sorts of, fantastic discoveries or whatever, but it's just got to be there to drive him to that.
That is so good, because I think often we think boredom leads to shenanigans, but
No,
I don't.
yeah.
I really like that, because even shenanigans are learning, right?
Yeah.
You know, why did my kid come back from the pond all muddy and wet? Well, he got bored and went and had fun, and that's not a bad thing, right?
Right.
I think that ought to be encouraged in boys. So
Yep.
that's so good. I've never thought about that way. So boredom is the catalyst to learning. Is a catalyst to learning.
A catalyst. Yeah.
Yep. Very good.
Yeah, I'm going to use that, by the way. The next time the kid comes into my office, like, that class is boring, I'm going to say, good, then you can learn a whole bunch.
It's a catalyst.
I heard somewhere that's a catalyst for learning. No, I'm serious. This is actually great. Because what's one of the things we keep trying to do is put it back on the student, because they're all conditioned. A lot of our kids come from the public school system, and they're all conditioned to just have instructions given to them, and they do A, B, and C, and then they want to be done and think about something else. And we keep trying to put it back on the kid that, no, this is your education, and you have to be involved in it and take ownership of it and maybe even drive it a little bit. And so maybe a little bit of boredom is a good thing.
Yeah, and really, we want to create self-learners. We want to create kids who know how to learn, and so that's all a part of that process. John Taylor Gatto, again, to bring him up, he said, teach a kid how to find the right information, how to find the right people who can help him find the right information. Like, it was all a process of teach them how to learn, teach them where to go. And so if you can equip them with those tools, there's, the sky's the limit. They can learn.
Yeah, that's good. I've really enjoyed this. So is there
Good.
anything else, Jay, that you would like to cover, ask?
No, I don't think so.
All right, so generationscedar.com, that's where people can find your stuff. Where can they buy your book?
Well, there are links on my blog, but if you want to go straight to Amazon, I'm there. So I have I think there are 6 or 7 books there that I've
You're a
written.
prolific author, Miss Crawford. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it is a little. There are a few.
Well, Kelly, I'm so thankful you came
been
on.
Great. Yeah, it's been great. It's great to hear another perspective, from sort of another realm of the education world or another side of the coin. It's been super helpful. You've even given me things to think about even as I go into work tomorrow. So really appreciate you coming on.
I hope so. That's awesome.
So, great. Well, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.
The kings who fight against my Lord shall taste his wrath and meet his sword upon their